everybody. This is Lehman pre-episode. I'm doing this actually post-episode, but I thought that I would add this to the beginning to let you know that this episode, a majority of it is getting into the emails and answering questions from the emails, which is fun. Something that we want in the Delphi Council debriefings is to interact with the fan. So if you have your emails, and we say this every episode, please email us at torgdcd@gmail.com. We will read your emails. If it's a comment, we'll read the comments. If you have a question, we'll try to answer your question to the best of our abilities. We'll give alternate thoughts and examples as we can. But I did want to mention that if you came specifically for the discussion on perks, we do social perks towards the end of this episode, but we didn't get very far. We only did 4 of them, and there are a lot of social perks. So this will be a multi-part session. There are multi-parts to the social perks. In addition, since I don't know what time that will be once I stitch everything together, I will put in the description, both in the podcast places and on the YouTube video, when that occurs, so that if you wish to skip ahead to us talking about the perks, you may do so. Also, somehow, when I started this recording, I had Mark and Jay's pictures in the opposite places. So Mark is listed as Jay and Jay is listed as Mark. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you're listening, you don't have to worry about it. And I figured that out after a while and flipped them. So that's my bad. I didn't want to have to stop the podcast and redo everything just because a couple of names were switched. So I figured just telling you that at the beginning, it might be a little distracting if you're watching it. If not, you don't have to worry about it. So having said that, let's just jump into the episode. And thanks everybody for your support. Hello, everybody. This is the Torg Eternity Delphi Council Debriefings, where the storm has a name. Once again, we are your hosts, Lehman, Mark, and Jay. And today's episode, we have a couple of emails that we will read and answer the questions to, as well as getting into part 1 of the social perks. The social perks category is one of the longer ones, the one that has a lot of entries that are scattered throughout various books. So I will try to state which of the source books or other various products out there have these perks so that you can know where to look for them. So before we get on to those perks, let's do the emails. And we do read emails. We read and listen to the comments, and then we answer any questions that we can to the best of our ability. So if you do have comments or questions you want to send to us, that is torgdcd@gmail.com, and you can reach us there. So let me go into the email. So the first email is, first off, let me say that I am enjoying the perks episodes. Well, that's great because we have a perk episode today, especially since I can more easily recommend them to my players without fear of spoilers, and they tell me they like the show. Thanks for bringing you and your group into listening and or viewing the show, depending on where you and they are getting us from. But it says, recently Mark mentioned a kind of formula to gauging threat strength relating to damage versus toughness. And I wonder if you could talk more about that and clarify it. I have to admit that I've been emboldened by my very first session where 2 day 1 PCs defeated a giant dinosaur using the environment and interaction attacks while holding nothing more than a hockey stick. It made me think there was a way out of anything, but that's not necessarily proven true in campaign play.
So I'd love to have a better threat verification system. Thanks as always, Siskoid. So since Mark was the one that was talking about that, let's go over to Mark first.
So there's not really a formal formula beyond the rule of, I guess it's called the rule of fives, right? And the way
Gotta
that
have a rule name for it.
you got to have a rule name, because then you can reference it. It really flows off of wounds, where damage over toughness every 5 points equates to a wound, right? And so I use the Nile Empire Shock Trooper and the First Planting Gospog as my base mob, my base threat, and work from there, to gauge where I'm going and what I'm doing, because everybody at Alpha has encountered Gospog of the First Planting, and Nile Empire Shock Troopers are like they're everywhere. They're ubiquitous.
They're like ants.
I mean, they are like ants. And so you can look at the stat block for the Nile Empire Shock Trooper or the Gospog, the First Planting Gospog, and you can start to see what that base level threat looks like. For example, you've got Charisma 6, Dexterity 7, Mind 7, Spirit 8, and Strength 8 on a Nile Empire Shock Trooper. So if we add all that up, what is that? 16, 23, 36 points, whereas a base character is 40 points. So you can kind of get an idea based on a green Storm Knight that just got created, 40 attribute points. Doesn't matter how they're spread out too much at the moment. You can kind of look at those and say, okay, well, this is sub by about 10%. So, okay, that's cool. You start looking at toughness and shock and their ability to put out damage. And now you're getting a little more complex, but you got to kind of take into account where your group is and where like the damage dealer, like the melee fighter or whoever the tank is who rolls into combat, stands there and becomes the fixed emplacement that tries to draw aggro off everybody to hit him or her. Your dwarf in dragon armor, whoever it is.
The classic,
right? And that's the easy one to go with, right? The dwarf in dragon armor, because they got like a 17 or an 18 toughness. They got that tower shield. They just kind of tromp into battle, and when they start swinging the battle axe or the hammer and whatever. You got to look at the damage output of your threat versus the toughness of the people that they're going up against to gauge the danger you're putting your Storm Knights in from a GM standpoint. If you're throwing damage 12 at them and their toughness is an 8, okay, fine. That's only 4 points on a standard hit. But when you get into good and outstanding, now you're running into a wound. And so you have to look at the idea that if I hit with how likely, where did I make their fire combat or their melee combat? How likely am I going to be to do a good or an outstanding hit against my Storm Knights? And now you start to have to do some math, and it gets a little more. I was told there was going to be no math. It gets a little complicated at that point, but you have to you're looking for those 5 points, right? You're looking to see how many 5 points you're going to get. And you can't really get into it can explode because it's a BD, right? Yeah, it can. A random is always against the players and always in the favor of the bad guys. Always. Random is always good for the bad guys and not good for the players, because sometimes it goes way bad against them. And then what do? I mean, Wednesday night, I was very fortunate not to get killed because I was all by myself in an encounter, like for 4.5 rounds. But thank you.
Sounds like you should have known better.
And disconnected.
Right, and disconnected, yeah, for 2 rounds. Now, I should have known better, but we didn't really have a choice. It was that or we get stranded on a dead world. So, okay. But the point is, you have to kind of holistically look at your threats that you're putting against your Storm Knights and start gauging how likely am I to do 5 points of damage, 10 points of damage, 15 points of damage, that kind of thing. You cannot plan for, damn, my Storm Knight's disconnected, I am going to absolutely murder them. You can't plan for that. It's the dice. It's going to happen. But you can do some math and get into probabilities and say, I got 17 on my fire combat, and the the tank that I'm going up against has an 11 dodge. I got a really good chance of having a good or an outstanding hit. What kind of damage do they do? Well, if you give them a 22 caliber pistol, that's not a lot of damage. So, okay, you could hit all day long and get outstanding damage and do, 12, 14, 16 points of damage and maybe do a wound. But if you, get what's that Fav pulverizer, whatever, that does 16 points of damage and I get an outstanding, and now my base is 18 and average Storm Knight toughness is around a 12, I'm a wound all day, every day. And that's if I don't roll medium damage. If I roll average damage, I'm looking at 21, 22 points. And now I'm doing 2 wounds out of the gate. That's a boss. That's not a let me give 2 to every Storm Knight. That's your boss threat. That's not. How do we have 8 of these on the board? Damn, we're gonna get killed. So
Jay, your thoughts?
To me, I think the setting in general is set up to be that the average strength is 8. And therefore, somebody scoring a normal hit with a standard pistol with a damage of 13 will do a wound and kill an Ord. Right? Like, that is sort of the base setting. And when I explained that to one of my players, it was after 2 years of playing this game, I might add, it was like an epiphany that he just like, oh, Ords just die. Yeah. But that's sort of the thing. Like, if you do less than 13 damage, you are probably not going to be doing a wound. And if you do 13 or more, you'll be doing a wound to an average unarmored individual, because that's what those shock troopers, they just got their skirts. That's it. Whereas Adinos are buff, and other goobers for the different realms have armor generally. But
I'm stealing that term, by the way, goobers.
Yeah, as soon as you add any armor, like even 1 point of leather armor, suddenly a normal pistol shot does not kill someone. Right? Now you have to get a good success to potentially kill them. And so I think that's sort of the thing you got to worry about. Statistically, if we are going to put a little math in, on rolling a 6-sided die to add to the damage, on average, you would get 3.5. But on a penetrating d6, the kind where you roll again and add -1, it basically rounds it up. It adds another 0.5. So you can assume that any bonus dice will be 4 extra damage, whether that's true or not. But that's sort of where you can have your assumptions. The problem, though, is that, as I mentioned, this is the assumption of the setting. And assuming how the setting works is in no way, shape, or form what the player characters are going to do. You will probably have a bunch of people with a strength of 5, and you'll probably have one guy with a toughness of 18 or something who's the tank. And so the danger is in the difficulty rather is in trying to make encounters that could possibly hurt that dragon warrior dwarf, which won't just completely paste everybody else. And this is something that's been a long time. Every role-playing game has had it. We played Cyberpunk 2020 for decades, and it was a huge issue there because the armor was crazy in that game. And as soon as you could get anything that could get through a solo's armor, it would just eradicate pretty much anything else that you touched. So you do have to be careful with that. And so I guess one of the lesser talked about ways of mitigating this is how you roll attacks. If you have every single shock trooper shoot individually at each target, they're generally going to do way more damage.
Yep.
Same thing if it's creatures with big claws and stuff. But if you just roll one attack using the combined action boost, so to indicate 6 of them are going to attack, it is A, quicker, right? But B, less deadly for the players. Unless you roll really, really well, then whatever the bonus for their combined attack might sort of put it over the top. But generally speaking, it will do less damage than if you had rolled everything separately. Especially if you roll separately and you don't even do that much damage, it's much easier to accidentally shock out the entire party as well. So I think that is another thing that people really need to be cognizant of. And the last thing I wanted to mention is in the beta clearance GM primer, There is a little section at the back that talks, I guess it's more the front, talks about average skill levels for enemies of different clearances. They don't actually have alpha on there. It's all about beta or higher. I would say underneath that, they have a skill rating table, which is what the rough competence level is for someone. So if someone has a poor competence, they have a skill total that's attribute plus skill of 6. Competent is 8, skilled is 10, elite is 12, renowned master is 14, top tier is 16, world champion is 18, and supernaturally gifted is 20. So I kind of take that to be, again, the goober types will generally have a 10, in whatever they're rolling. And then the next level up, like some kind of other kind, just generic threat from that realm, will generally be a 12 in whatever their focus is. After that, you do have to really start worrying about the potential of throwing bonus dice onto things.
And if I can add one
Yeah.
thing to what you just said, because your combined actions versus like if you drop three threats per Storm Knight, you got 15 out there on the table, rolling for all of the 15. That's a giant combined actions. Great. Your threats are smart, most of them, if they're people. I mean, sometimes they're goober types, and
sometimes they're mindless.
Sometimes they are mindless, but sometimes they're stupid because they're mooks, whatever. But sometimes they're not, and then you have guys like that tank that they maneuver him, or they figure out where his weak point is, and you can interact with him and make him very vulnerable, and now you've got a better shot at it. So don't play your threats just, all I got to do is roll attack rolls, because you can really, and that will dial up the concern on your players when they start getting very vulnerable, because, hey, wait a minute, they're not all attacking me. I can stand here with my toughness of 18 and take this all day long and pile up some shock. I got a second win card. I'm good to go. And wait a minute, what do you mean he's trying to maneuver me? I suck at maneuver. Oh crap, I'm very vulnerable. And now all of a sudden they're sweating a little bit because they're not as.
And that also lets you kind of plan around the rest of your group's defenses too. If the majority of the group has a toughness of, say, 12, and then your big tank has 16, then if you can consider that you're probably going to make the tank very vulnerable, then you can plan your encounter for an average toughness of 12.
Yeah.
And if you don't want to be causing like TPKs, make sure you're not equipping everybody with devastators or God's will plasma cannons.
that's the whole point of the game, right? Is play your threats smart so that they can add that heightened level of tension in there. But by the same token, when it applies to Gospog aren't smart. No. Gospog's brains, right? And they roll in. Let them be, it's a good thing to let the tank wade into combat and then go, and nobody's touching me. This is awesome. This is what I was built to do. Let them do the stuff they're built to do, because it's fun.
So yes, I'll agree with all the points that you both made. To Siskoid, the thing to look at if you're just looking at maths and calculations is on both the player characters, the Storm Knights and the villains, between the skill, their offensive skill, and the defense of the other side, and then the base damage versus the toughness of the other side, and the rule of fives, or every 5 is going to do something, whether that's on the attack side, add bonus dice, or if it's on the damage mitigation on the toughness side, on how many wounds you take. So you kind of start looking at what your characters have, what the threats have, and you can do that. But with exploding dice and with the card play system, the randomness can throw things completely out of whack. Like what happened with, and just the situations, what happened last night with Mark is his character went in through a portal, and before the rest of us could go through, the portal closed, so he was outside of the rest. And then the first thing he did was try to shoot a firearm in aisle and disconnected, and you're always at a disadvantage because you cannot spend possibilities. Disconnected, bad. It wasn't like he was going up against something. There was like one lieutenant-ish thing, and then a bunch of goobers, if we're going to use that word. So it wasn't like it was a decent threat, yes, but manageable. But the situation made it almost a character death. Luckily,
And I
Mark's
had a wound.
character and persevered, made it through it, but things like that happen. I had like the tiny encounter before combat encounter before a main encounter happened, where the first two cards were the party was set back and then confused on the next round. So could not, the first round they get their cards into their pools, and then the second round they can't use the cards. So that was posed really bad, and I believe we were using the Nile Empire deck, which the setback and the situational text in the middle, situation line, I think is what we determined it was called officially, was a obstacle came into play, and I rolled randomly on the table, and it was all Storm Knight's disconnect. So I mean, it was just the very first two rounds was like, am I going to have a TPK on a pre-encounter? Like it was just supposed to kind of do a little thing, get people ready for the big one, and then on the big one they mop the floor. So stuff like
that's how it goes.
Defeating the dinosaur with the hockey stick completely will happen. Yes, just be careful because it can flip the other way. There is no perfect science
In a heartbeat.
We don't have CRs and stuff like that, so you just kind of have to be fluid. And yes, Jay.
One other thing, be doubly cautious about this situation involving vehicles. Because I was running one of the Delphi Council missions, and in the mission, it has, these drones come and they shoot torpedoes at the boat that the Storm Knights are on, and on average, it might cause a wound to it, but I rolled something like it was like a 40 something. I can't remember now, but like the amount of damage, I was just looking at it. It's like, this is potentially just going to one shot this entire ship on the very first thing. So be careful for them, because there's no way to soak unless you have one very specific perk. So vehicles are a lot more fragile than player characters.
Mm-hmm. And vehicle getting hurt, I believe the shock transfers to the characters too.
Yeah,
so
everyone takes shock. Yeah.
Yep.
So that's a bad thing. So hopefully, Siskoid, we gave you some tips and things to look at. There's no exact formula, but if you just remember in Torg Eternity, damage and combat and interactions, it's 5s. That's success levels. That's wound levels. And then when you're talking about difficulties and bumping up attributes and stuff, like Jay was saying, the 10 to 12, that goes along with the difficulty chart, whereas 10 is standard, 12 is challenging, etc. by 2 points. So we will then move to our next email. So this one is, hey there, I'm glad you're spending time on the podcast to discuss. I would love to hear you officially pronounce some Torg names, please. It might also provide some comedy for the podcast. Yes, it's going to provide some comedy. Let's see a debate on how we should say words like Edenos, Aurosh, etc. What are some of the most confusing names in the game? And can we all come together to get a proper pronunciations? Looking for some official answers, not say the names however you like, so we can all easily understand each other at the table. I was thrown a little when Lehman pronounced Edenos like Edenos or Dinos. Best regards, Game Night. So Game Night, yes. Pronunciations, I will say Edenos incorrectly because I said it correctly for many years before I started learning Greek. And then if any word tends to look Greekish to me, then I will make an OS, which is not common in English. So my mind sees an OS, all subconsciously. I see an OS. It doesn't seem English. It seems Greek, and I will make it OS. So that's why I say it. I know it's not, but if I'm just subconsciously doing it, that will happen. There is an actual video that you can look up on YouTube that they ask all the Torg Eternity creators, the designers at the time, as well as they might have even asked Greg Gordon himself on it, who was one of the co-creators of Torg, the original classic Torg, and they all say the same thing except for Ross Watson, who I believe he said it like Edinos, maybe, until everybody else said it, and then he's like, okay, it's Edinos. I will pronounce things incorrectly. Also, a lot of times, the way that you hear it and the way that your group hears it, that will be kind of your way, and then you hear somebody else say it, and it will be different. I remember for that Gaunt Man's reality, I learned it as Orish, and then when I want to say when I heard Greg and others say it, it was Rorsch. JM, who was one of the previous hosts here on the podcast, he always pronounced it something like O Rorsch. So you will get people who
sounded
are
like Orosh
or something. Yes,
because it always seemed weird when he said it.
to me, it was like a long O, so it was like an O Rosh maybe, or O Rorsch or something.
You got to tell him your cool thing that I was blown away by. I was 0 days old when he said this, and I've been playing old Torg too, or classic Torg too. So
yes, I'll say that, but basically, we will pronounce it incorrectly or correctly, depending. And I know you want official, but we don't have any of the original designers around, or even the classic Torg designers and stuff. And I can ask Greg at times, but sometimes it's just through email. And if I don't hear it, seeing it, how people might spell it out or try to sound it out visually might be incorrect as well. For some of the ones, I would say Isle, for where, and another Uthorian is the High Lord. If either of you have a different way, I've heard Isle called Izzle in some videos, and that was kind of like, oh, what's that? Oh, but I think it was supposed to be like the Isles, an island, Isles, Isle in your supermarket or something like that.
It depends on how you read it too. Like if you're dyslexic or something, you can easily get where the S is mixed
my
up.
brain kind of wants to look at that more like ale than Isle, but it's Isle.
Mm-hmm. So there's things like that. I pronounce Uthorian, but I could see it Thorian maybe. Some of the other ones, Barak Ka, I think that one is pretty Ketikales. I will say there's also certain things, depending, even if you do know other languages and what the roots of things are, certain things will be pronounced differently depending on what dialect or what time period you're using. There's a perk that I, being from a classical Latin background, would call magister, but others would say
this one.
magister or magister. So there's different ways to do that. The G is hard, but even if you look at medieval Latin, you're going to have differences. One of the most well-known sayings out there, Julius Caesar, I came, I saw, I conquered, is in the original Latin, Roman Latin, would have been winnie, witty, wiki. So the V's were a W sound, a wa. And then by Medieval Latin, it became the V sound, so it is the veni, vidi, vici that you usually hear. So that you're going to have different things like that. So basically, depending on who got it, who created it, who commonly uses it, and it's one of those things. Also, we here in the real world will say names differently than how that name, where it originated from, is, just because there's different dialects. We pronounce things differently, and things like that. So even in the real world, one of my characters from Tharcold is Ivan. We would say Ivan, but they pronounce it Ivan. They spell it in Cyrillic, but a transliteration would be Ivan. So you have differences even there with the same name. So I know it doesn't fully fit the official pronunciations, but it's one of those that I think is, by real world standards, we say things differently, and so it's not that. I'm not going to go around to people's house and beat on them if they say words a little different. And
You're
for
saying it wrong.
And for the Aurorish thing, and I think why my original game master did it as Orish is because if you take the H off of the end and put it at the beginning, it spells out horrors. So that's it. So it's basically, if you look at it as horrors without the huh, the hard huff sound at the beginning, it would be horrors, something like that. So if you just wanted to go off of a lot of the Torg names, both in Classic Torg and in Torg Eternity, were very unique when we come up with stuff like the other role-playing game and horrors for the horror realm and stuff like that. So
Aurore sounds better with a French accent. Yeah,
so any comments on any names that confused you guys, or that you use that either you found other people doing differently or you do different than the majority?
As a teenager, I always pronounced it Kanawa, but after more exposure through anime and such over the years, I now pronounce it as Kanawa instead. And we actually have a Japanese guy at work who, he's like just moved from Japan over to here. And so I was like, how would you pronounce this? And he was looking at it like, that's a really weird word. But yeah, that's how he said it would go. And the funny thing, talking about Adinos, is I always pronounced it as Adinos in my head. Because we basically, like, for Classic Torg, it was all theory for me, pretty much. And then when we finally started playing, the first time I said that, I was like, no, that can't be it. And then it turned into Adinos. So it was like, just sort of happened on its own.
But I look at it as the way you read a book. and when you read a book and you run into a word that you don't know how to say, you're not familiar with, and usually it's names, right? Especially in fantasy novels, people love to you don't get many knights named Bob, right? But they are what they are, and okay, well, this is how I'm going to say it, and you say it the easiest and the quickest way you can while you're reading it that makes sense to you, so that it doesn't slow you down and you don't stumble over it when you're reading the book, because you want to read smoothly and quickly and you want to get to the next part, right? And that's how it becomes in your head canon. That's how the name becomes, or the word, or whatever it is. And that's just what you read. And then if you do Audible books and somebody reads, like you've read the first two, and then you get an Audible book for the third one, and then they say, like, who the hell are they talking about? Oh, wait, that's this thing over here. That's how you say that? Well, crap. And now you got to reconcile the two. Or somebody else says Adinos, whatever, Magister, Magister, whatever. And it's your head canon. So do what your head canon says, because that's don't slow play down. because somebody wants to say a word one way and you want to say it another. Okay, whatever. Potato, potato. Let's go.
And you're from
I'm gonna
different
kill the bad guy.
realms, so your characters might
Yeah.
pronounce it different. I mean, not everybody says computer. There's various forms depending on which language you're talking, that it's all transliterated or spelt the same way, but different parts of it are stressed. And to go along with Mark's thing,
Yeah.
sometimes you'll read
Aluminum.
something. Yeah, aluminium and
Yeah.
Y'all, Ewans, use
Um,
guys.
The true life one, the cognitive dissonance that can happen is, there was a time when I would read a word and I completely understood what the word meant, and I would hear the word and I would completely understand what the word meant, but I never realized that they were the same word. And I just, because one of them was always through reading and one was always through listening, and it was the word paradigm, which when I read it, it was paradigm. So I was that guy who did paradigm when I read, because it's a GM.
Yeah.
Before I had, as a young teenager, before I had any language experience whatsoever, I've seen that with epitome. Somebody said epitome, and it took us a while to figure out what was happening. Yeah. So there are certain things like that you will read one way, pronounce a different way, or like me, you understand the meaning of both of them. You'll know that it's the same meaning, but you won't realize it's the same word, because if you don't hear it and you've only read it, then it changes. So hopefully that clarified things. Sorry, throughout the podcast, you'll be able to laugh at the pronunciation of me saying things differently than how other people say it. So thank you both for writing your emails. Please do send us emails with your questions and comments to torgdcd@gmail.com. And we will go into part 1 of the social perks. We will at least have a part 2. There's, I believe, a little over 25 of these. So it will take a while. So we will start with Always Prepared, which I believe originally, so there might be 2 sources. One, it originally was in the Isle backer archetype, and then it was placed into the Pan Pacifica source book. Since sometimes perks and stuff will have adjustments, we'll use the most recent, which is the Pan Pacifica source book. Social perk, Always Prepared, prerequisite, at least 2 adds in Persuasion. And it says, once per scene, you may spend a possibility to make a new requisition test. The item that results was previously arranged for delivery, or you simply had it all along. That last part is kind of fluff, but basically the mechanic is, if you fail or you don't get the success you wanted on a requisition test, you can spend a possibility to make a new one. So Jay, what are your thoughts on Always Prepared?
Yeah, this was originally from the Prepared Leader archetype, backer archetype. So the idea was, it's almost like a mini flashback. It's like, oh, of course I've prepared for the mission and we've always had this. But you could do it not necessarily just when you fail the requisition test, but like later in the mission, was my understanding. So this would essentially give you an additional one. Oh, kind of like the Delphi Council,
the cargo
package,
or...
the card. Yeah. I can't remember what it's called now. So basically, you could just
Delphi support.
That. Yeah, and you could do it once per scene, so you could do it multiple times per act and keep getting more and more stuff. So obviously you would probably have a decent persuasion. So this would actually be pretty good, especially because usually when you do your requisitions, you only have the vaguest of ideas of what you're going to be doing. And so because this could be done once per scene, anytime in the scene, you could do it once you figured out that you need something. It's like, oh, well, we need a cyber deck, or we need something else. It gives you a shot. So this is actually a pretty good one. The fact that you have to spend possibilities, some people might be iffy on it, but if you're not like an in-your-face combat character, this is the kind of thing you want to spend possibilities on, I would say.
Mhm.
So a very good support thing, which I think we're going to find a lot of the social perks are very good
Right.
support perks out of combat perks. And it is worth noting that the social category is one of those anyone from any reality can take these perks.
Yes, I thought about it, forgot to mention it, and right before you said it, I remembered. So thank you for bringing that up. Yes, all the social perks, or at least most of them, are in a category, or at least the general category is available to everyone. Mark, thoughts on Always Prepared?
Yeah, I agree with Jay. This is a really useful perk, especially for the idea. The characterizing it as a mini flashback is very apropos, assuming that your GM will let you use it that way. Knowing that, hey, we need this specific widget, that if we had this specific widget that's very unique, we would be better off in this situation. Okay, so I'm going to use Always Prepared. Here's my possibility. And I blow a drama and a hero, and boom, look at this. I hit a really high number, and now we've got the special widget, which makes, from a GM standpoint, it's potentially a scene destroyer, depending on how you set it up to have, like, I've got this fun little vignette thing going on here that they have to do this thing to get the widget, but okay, well, we're not going to try and negotiate the alligator filled moat to get to the widget because I had it all along. And so we just bypass all that. Okay, well, sometimes that happens, but again, that's letting your Storm Knights, let your players do what they built their characters to do. And that's fun, especially when something that's special like this is like a problem. This is a problem solver to me. You got a problem and everybody's like, I got nothing for this. What do we got? And you're pouring through your skill set, trying to find something. What if I did, can I do this? Will Scholar apply here? No, not so much. Okay. I've always had it. Here we go. Boom. It burns resources, but it gets you what you need. So
it does also word it like it could have been arranged for delivery. So
Sure.
the GM could say, oh, you see like the drop come down in the jungle over there, and now you've got to go get it, or something.
Little drone.
Yeah.
Make a little side quest to get the thing.
Yeah.
Or it could be like,
Sure.
when you mentioned, that it's once per scene and previously arranged, I just immediately thought of ancient armies that they would have the Navy go along the shoreline and drop off supplies for the army. So the army that got there later would have those supplies, things like that. It was also something that we did in camping when we would go out in the woods for a week. We would have little places that had the food there. So yeah, I think it's a pretty cool perk. Once per scene is really nice. I could see this going along with some of the scavenger, the Tharkold scavenger and stuff like that, where they're always using possibilities or cosm cards or whatever, using different resources to make sure that their party has what they need. So yeah, I think we all think that this is a pretty good support perk. Definitely not combat, but pretty nice up there.
Good way to get your law rocket, Mark.
Yes.
Always have law rockets. Always. You never know when that T-Rex is going to spring up on you.
So this next perk is from the Isle source book. It is Arcane Diplomat. Has a prerequisite of Charisma 10 higher, which means 99.9% of Storm Knights will not be able to get this. A joke based off of observation. The Storm Knight is capable of handling the jealousies and attitude of multiple arcane items. The hero may attune to 3 arcane items instead of just 1. So the normal thing this is more of an Isle-centric one, but it had been brought up when I, in a podcast, had mentioned a combination of a sword shield that were both kind of intelligent, and that this would be one way to get around that. that they were 2 items. So, Jay, what are your thoughts on Arcane Diplomat?
I like the fact that it's 3 and not 2. I think if it was 2, it would be too limiting for the amount of XP you probably have to spend. Because this is, I feel, not a early alpha perk. Like, it's not really going to come into play until a bit later. But Isle magic items, arcane ones especially, are kind of well known to be powerful. So the arcane title on them is sort of the limiter to stop someone turning into that stereotypical D&D high level character who's just like a walking magic shop. But once you're able to do it, it's going to be crazy. And the nice thing is if you have a charisma 10 plus, you can, and you put this along with wealthy or some of the other things, because wealthy character could probably start with 1 arcane item. And then they are the ones that are going to have a greater chance of just being able to requisition or purchase arcane items. So, yeah, and that way you can kind of change out. You might have your own permanent item, but before a mission starts, swap out, get something different. And in theory, this could also work with Be Prepared, right? Mm-hmm. If you had a high enough one, you could, in the middle of the adventure, get it. Or, I don't remember if it's worded this way. Let's look ahead into the future a little bit. Right. And if you are able to get your persuasion up high enough and you also have arms dealer, in theory, you could get like 5 of the same arcane item. As a GM, I don't know if I would actually let that fly, but there's a lot you could do with it. But again, it's not a beginner friendly thing, but it's something to aspire to, I would say.
Mark, your thoughts on Arcane Diplomat?
Yeah, this is absolutely not going to be one of your starting perks. Aside from the fact there's just no reason for it, even if you took Heirloom and Arcane Diplomat, thinking you're going to do something else, and you've got this stupid powerful Heirloom that you really love, that's great. You're gambling on the idea that you're going to find another one and then another one, which is, and to Liam's point, I don't know. I have a character that has a 10 charisma because I was like, well, nobody's going to build this, so let's see how stupid this is. And I built one, and he's actually kind of fun because he's a leader and he's a storyteller. But 9 times out of 10, charisma is a dump stat because, as we've talked about on this podcast, there are not a lot of skills that are built around charisma, and that may be changing. But as of the point of us recording this, there's not a lot that charisma drives. And so you have to go. I would say that anybody who's going to put a 10 in their charisma should consider this and try and work to it, because that takes advantage of the fact that you put a 10 in your charisma, and it'll make you a really powerful character. Even if you are a support or a leadership kind of guy or gal, you've got 3 arcane items you're rolling around with. I don't care who you are, that's pretty strong. So something to consider.
Yeah, I would agree that it's good specialized, where it's not something that everybody should take, every leader, every social person should take. But if you wish to go this way, it's almost kind of like a mini path from
have a plan. Yeah,
you have a plan, a path, and kind of thinking ahead. That kind of fits the feel for me on this. So then let's move on to Arms Dealer. Arms Dealer it looks like it was started by the Tharkol Backer archetype and then was put into the Pan Pacifico sourcebook. So we'll use the Pan Pacifico sourcebook version. Prerequisite is at least 2 adds in Streetwise. When requisitioning items, test first and then choose a weapon with a value equal to or less than the action total. Ignore rarity and restrictions on military weapons. Instead of choosing a single weapon, the arms dealer may choose to take 2 identical weapons at value plus 2 or 10 identical weapons at value plus 5. So, Jay, what are your thoughts on Arms Dealer?
Well, obviously, you'll want a high charisma for this too. Someday I'll get into my opinion on charisma and GMing, but it would probably take half an entire episode to go over my feelings on it and
The
how
charisma
most people do not treat it appropriately. But so what I will say here is this: one of my players always loves playing a fixer in Cyberpunk, and he was in the process of making a character who was essentially a weapons fixer, like a weapons dealer, in our campaign when this came out, when I was doing the playtesting.
Mm-hmm.
So as soon as we saw it, it was like, look at this. And so he took it and it was like, all right. And this has a few key powers to it that make it very, very good. Even if you ignore all of the being able to get multiple copies of stuff, it does. First of all, you roll and then you pick what you want. You don't say what you're aiming for. And then if you fail, the GM has to come up with some kind of scraps to give you, like a normal requisition. In this, you roll, and then it's like, okay, let's flip through and see what I want. Secondly, you ignore any rarity and military weapon restrictions, which GMs will often, to stop certain individuals from constantly getting law rockets, say that they are hard to acquire. But this specifically ignores that. And then being able to get multiple of the same thing is much better, especially when you're looking at consumables. I think when it's a poor roll or whatever, this usually gets used for grenades. I find it's like, well, we could get 10 grenades, right? 10 law rockets is a bit too much to carry, but
I'll make it work.
The only big limitation on it is that it has to be a weapon, right? So you can't use it for potions or for vehicles or armor or anything like that. It has to be a weapon, but most players of most role-playing games are totally fine with just getting weapons in my experience.
Guns, lots of guns.
And we're just going to keep saying this, but this is a really good perk for someone who is specialized in this because it's a force multiplier. It can make all of the rest of the characters better, essentially.
Yep.
Mark, thoughts?
This is the first thing that comes to mind. Me is the sommelier from John Wick. Like, yes, sir, a P30 SK for the discreet carry would be fantastic. Those kinds of things. It also tickles my, wait a minute, I don't have to worry about Delphi count, because I like explosives and I like things that go boom, like law rockets, because law rockets are anti-dragon and anti-T-Rex and anti-armor, right? And they can overcome that big toughness boss that you have to deal with, which we used to great effect a number of weeks ago, which I won't get into too detail, but routinely I am told, well, no, the Delphi Council doesn't really want to send military grade explosives into an urban environment. That's just not a good idea. Well, with this, I get to take 10 bricks of C4 into the neighborhood and do whatever I want with it. So yeah, I could absolutely, for the players that want to blow stuff up, this is a great perk. For the players who want to be able to, you get a machine gun and you get a machine gun and you get a machine, that's absolutely, you can, as Jay said, this is a force multiplier that depending on, but it is again, like with always prepared, you need to be, this is a problem solver, and you're like, where am I going to go? Do I really think I need to have this? Yes, I think I need to have this. So let me go ahead and get these things set up. And you may not need it. You might need it.
Though keep in mind, you can combine this with always prepared.
You absolutely can. and I will say this. I know what the text says. The text says this, regardless of rarity or military, what does it say? Restrictions. Rarity or military restrictions. GMs, don't let that back you into a corner. If you know that rolling out of here with a law rocket is a bad idea, don't give it to them. And don't let them point to the words on the page and say, you have to give me my law rocket. No, you don't. So
It also doesn't mention anything about modifiers due to being from a different reality.
yeah, I mean, players, if your GM is like, I understand what it says on the page, you can't have a law rocket, then just roll with it. There's a reason. It's not us against them, but there's a reason. Just roll with it.
Also, it doesn't specify it, but given what it is and what the prerequisite is, I would only let this work with streetwise requisitions, not with persuasion requisitions personally.
Oh yeah, you got to turn. Well, persuasion, I get to turn it back in. Streetwise, I get to keep it.
Yeah, but I mean, does you being an arms dealer mean the Delphi Council is going to give you 10 of these things? Does that mean you're just going to sell them to somebody?
That's a requisition from the Delphi Council. Streetwise means I went out and founded it from my contacts, right?
That's what I would think an arms dealer would more be.
Their own contacts.
Yeah, like you're buying these, you're
the
selling them normally, except this time you're using them.
Yeah, I know you don't want me to take C4 in the neighborhood. Don't worry about it. We'll be out the door. And hey, Jacko,
you better bring that C4 back.
Hey guys, I need a case of the stuff when we roll out of here. All right, meet me at the corner of 5th and 18th. All right, I'll see you there.
Yeah. So, Game Masters, you'll have to look at the book. Even though this one ignores rarity restrictions, be aware that there are rules about rarity and restrictions and things being from other realms, because I'm pretty sure there's probably lots of Game Masters and players that don't realize that those rules exist. And that is a way to make it so that when you're in the living land, you aren't just finding those law rockets in C4 because they've transformed or don't work or whatever there. But do look into those rules. Otherwise, yeah, this is a pretty cool perk that, as Jay said, it's good on its own, and when you combine it with other ones, then it kind of leads down that path, which is always cool when you can do that with a character. So let's move to the next one. The next one is Bring the Beats, which is from the Runes of the Living Land. It's a pamphlet that you can find on Drive-Thru RPG, as well as it was printed, at least for some of the Kickstarters. Jay, for those who are listening, Jay is showing the physical print of it. And special. You need 2 or more adds in Persuasion. And using this perk requires a method of playing music. At the beginning of each encounter, test reality. A success grants 1 card flip. A good success, 2 card flips. Outstanding provides 3. Each time a drama card is revealed, the character may use one of the generated flips to turn over a new drama card instead. So Jay, your thoughts on Bring the Beats?
This was originally I think it was the Inspiring DJ was the archetype, the backer archetype, and it's got the guy going like that. But personally, I think this should be a reality perk, not a social perk, but that's neither here nor there.
And Game Masters, if you do find a perk that you really think should be in a different category, feel free to move it to a different category if that fits your team.
And I think the fact that it's kind of hidden in this book and in a backer archetype is what has stopped this from being used a lot more. Although I think I have seen one character with it in Torganized play. But yeah, just basically potentially getting 3 C's initiatives is pretty good.
Yeah,
it's fantastic.
Yeah, it's not very specific as to how long this lasts, though. I guess it's just for that 1 encounter. So yeah, at the beginning of the encounter, it is somewhat limited in that, like, at least I would say you have to have the music playing already, probably. Like, you can't, I don't know if I would just let them start something as soon as, like, once the combat already began. So if you were ambushed, I don't know if I would allow it, but otherwise, yeah. And I think this, even though it's a core Earth character originally, I could totally see someone in Pan-Pacific Power armor blaring music and Yeah. Or even like
Dun, dun,
Tharkol.
dun, 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 dun,
Yeah,
dun.
yeah, you can see a techno demon coming in with that playing, right? So yeah, it's pretty good.
Mark,
There's nothing really more to say.
Well, so we have in the Wednesday night stream, we've got Robert's character brings the beats. And to Jay's point, we've just been rolling it the way that it reads. And at the beginning of an encounter, he tests reality and he gets those pips to use, and they are free seize initiatives. I like the way that Jay approached that with the idea of how does this initiate, and the wording on it isn't real. It just says do it, right? But if you want to step away from that and look at the common sense about it, I love the idea of in a regular encounter, at the beginning of the encounter, you just test reality and go. You could, if you wanted to, GM, say on the hero's turn or on the hero's portion of the card when it comes up, now you test reality.
Yeah.
But the problem with that is
Or make it
that
an
means that
action.
that first card you're not going to be able to do anything about, which maybe that's balancing. I don't know, because you can't, if that's card 40 and it's like setback or villain's flurry or villain's up, and you're like, oh no, we can't have that, they're going to kill us, and then that completely nerfs this perk on that first card every time. I think the middle of the road way to go with that is on a regular encounter, test reality, and then you can use it on the first card if you want to. If you're surprised, you don't get to, because as Jay pointed out, is the music playing? Well, in surprise, you haven't picked up your music and started playing or whatever. But in a regular encounter, you're like, oh, we're in battle, and the bard starts strumming on the lute or whatever. So yeah, I love this perk. It's a great perk for a controller, and you just have to work out with your GM on how they're going to adjudicate it in their table before you roll up on them and say this is how it works, because it might not work that way.
trying to think, it's like Bjorkson, who's a death metal, and he has a guitar axe from Tharkold. That's
Yes.
who's the one that uses Bring the Beats. I would agree with both Jay and Mark. It doesn't state it, so as a game master, of course, choose what works best at your table. But I would also lean towards if the group is surprised, they wouldn't be able to be doing this at the beginning. But if it's a normal standard, standard or dramatic, but if it's not a surprise encounter, I would just allow it at the beginning, so that way the person who's bought a perk can use the perk that they bought, and then
And notably, unlike Seize Initiative, can be used when confused.
Can. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, because it's not a card. So
Yeah.
even better. So that actually we didn't get very far. We got 1, 2, 3,
No.
4 of them, but we had a lot of discussion about the emails.
Yeah, we did.
We will have probably 2 more parts to this, so just kind of wetting your whistle out there for what is to come. But so far, all 4 of those perks are pretty solid perks for somebody who wants to do a little bit more than be the combat guy. I mean, you could be a combat guy with some of them, but it is fully able to be somebody who contributes to the group and is not in a fully combative build.
You're the hero. You're the hero with Bring the Beats if you get rid of Confused and whenever that card shows up. I mean, come on. You did your job. I don't have to do anything else. You're not confused. Congratulations.
You can
hero.
play cards. Yeah.
That's right.
So we do want to thank you for listening to us. And again, send us your emails at torgdcd@gmail.com, and we will read your emails. And next time we'll dig into part 2. So until then, we hope you have fun in your Cosmverse. Bye.